Today I'll be showing you how I painted the background for this wolf painting. Hi there, my name is Michelle Cashmore and today's video will be the first of two parts on creating this wolf painting. Today I'll be covering how I airbrush the background for this painting. So for airbrushing supplies I use an Iwata Neo airbrush, which is a really good entry level airbrush. It's not too expensive but it's still very good quality. For the medium that goes in the airbrush, it needs to be really runny and really fine in order to avoid clogging up the airbrush. So you do get special airbrush paints, but what I like to use are acrylic inks. So I use two different brands of ink here. I've got Liquitex ink and Rowney FW acrylic ink. So these are acrylic based, which makes them quite similar in finish to acrylic paints, but they're much thinner. And I really like to use them as I find that I can just use them straight in the airbrush without having to alter them at all, without having to mix them with water or medium or anything else. I can just mix up my colours and go straight in the airbrush without any clogging or any problems. So I should point out that I'm very new to airbrushing myself. This is probably the third or fourth time that I've used the airbrush, so I'm by no means an expert on how to airbrush, especially not with fine details. But the good news is that in order to get an out of focus background like I'm going for here, it's actually one of the easier things to do with an airbrush. So there's no fine details, no sharp points or anything like that, so that's easier to achieve for a beginner with airbrush. So let's move on to the demonstration itself. So I've started off here with a canvas that I've gessoed to make a little smoother and then painted with a flat coat of burnt orange acrylic. I've then outlined the wolf onto it just so that I can see where the background needs to go. For the airbrushing, I've started off with a darker red colour. I'm just going for a mottled look here, so I'm just paying attention to my reference photo and marking in the areas of colour. So when using the airbrush, you need to be very careful to hold it upright and steady. I sometimes use two hands just to keep it steady. It's a double action airbrush, which means when you push down, that controls the airflow, and when you pull back, that controls the flow of the paint. You always want to push down first, then pull back so that the air comes before the paint, and then do the reverse when stopping. That allows the air to clean out the airbrush. I'm just using a little well palette off to the side to mix my colours. Then when it comes to putting them in the airbrush, I use a little dropper to place them into the paint cup. Usually in between colours I just use water to flush out the airbrush, and that's enough, that works well enough. Sometimes it might need a more thorough clean using airbrush cleaner, but I usually just save that for the end of the session. Most of the ink colours are pretty translucent, however the white ink that I'm using, which is by Liquitex, is very opaque. This makes it really good for layering on top, so if you need to lighten an area, you apply the white first and then you can layer your more translucent colours over the top. So for example, in the light area above the wolf's head, a lot of that's going to have a quite yellowish feel, but the yellow by itself won't stand out on the orange, so I'm applying white first. You can see here a lot of my marks are actually quite wonky. This is because I'm not very well practiced with the airbrush yet, but I just keep on layering and keep adjusting it until I get the look that I want. It's actually quite forgiving. The backdrop behind the canvas that you can see is actually a cheap plastic shower curtain that I hang up behind the easel. I just use this to catch the worst of the overspray. In most cases there's not really an awful lot of mess from the airbrush. There's certainly not as much as I expected when I first started, but because I'm working on such a big canvas and need to run off the edge of it, I just wanted to put that up just to make sure that my walls would be protected. There is a bit of dust sometimes from airbrushing afterwards around, but it's usually not too bad. That said though, because the airbrush is spraying paint into the air and there is dust, as I say, it's really important to wear a mask and to work in a ventilated area. My overall aim for this background is to have an autumnal forest scene, so lots of reds and yellows and browns, and just lots of blurry leaves and the impression of being in a wood. I am using a reference for this background, but because it's so blurry and out of focus, it doesn't have to be exact to the reference that I'm using. I'm just going for close and to give the same overall impression. You can see how it's going through layers of not looking particularly great. The yellow at the top, for example, is too harsh in places, too light in others. It's overall very blotchy. However, I'm going to work back over that again with more white layers. I'm just building up the layers, working over anything that looks messy, and just keep on building it up until it looks how I want it. I've made this bottom right hand corner a bit too dark, so I'm just adding more white spots on it to lighten it up again. I'm not going to leave them as these harsh white dots, that would be too contrasty, but I need to lighten them up first so that I can apply my more translucent reddish colours over the top of it. Apologies for my camera not keeping focus very well during this section. Now here I'm trying to lighten up the leaf that you can see along the top. Here I didn't do a great job on the highlights. I made the leaf look too uniform so it doesn't look so natural. I need to come back through and fix that later on. But you can see here like the mistakes that I'm making and how I'm fixing them as I go along. Don't get discouraged if you do make mistakes. In a medium like acrylics, it's very forgiving. You can just work back over it and you can correct your mistakes, so don't give up if you make a mistake on your piece. You can see as well that I'm not too worried about keeping out of the area where the wolf will be. It would be impossible to do that with an airbrush anyway, or next to impossible. What I'll do once I'm finished the background is paint over the area of the wolf in a flat colour, and then I will paint the details of the wolf in over the top of that, and you'll see that in the next video. I'm having a slight delay here while I clean out the airbrush off screen, sorry about that. I'm just going back and reworking that leaf that I mentioned earlier to make it look a bit more natural and a bit less even and regimented. It just makes it flow much better. The leaves and branches at the top were the areas that I found hardest, partly to get the leaf natural looking, as I've mentioned before, but also to get the lines even for the branches that you can see. So following a straight line with an airbrush is a bit trickier than using a regular paintbrush and just needs a bit of practice. You can see how mine are just slightly wonky here, but fortunately in the final piece it ends up good enough that it's not really noticeable. Now I'm just adding some final colours to the bright leaves at the top. The light in this background is very warm, almost like a warm evening light, and I wanted it to reflect that, so I don't want to leave it just as a stark white. I more or less have the whole background in place now. I'm just working through the piece and making tweaks where I need to, so adding more colours where it's needed, lightening it up where it's required, and just generally making touch-ups here and there, so you'll see me jump around quite a lot from this point on. One of the things I find very useful to do with any painting or drawing is to step back from it periodically and have a look at it from a distance. So I can either do this by getting up physically and walking back to view it from a distance, or taking a photo of it on your phone is also quite a good way of doing this. That way you can see what areas aren't working as a whole, because when you're up close in the painting it's sometimes too hard to see the picture as a whole. So here I noticed that the lower right hand corner was still too dark, so I would need to lighten that up quite significantly. And some final touch-ups and we have a completed background. And that is it for this video. I do hope you've enjoyed it. If you'd like to see more and be kept up to date with what I'm working on, then please do subscribe. You can also find me on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter, and at my website michellecashmoreart.com. And if you're interested in prints of my work, I have most of them available at Fine Art America as well. I hope to see you again soon.